Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management, FRBM Act 2003. Let's explain everything step by step in the simplest way possible, as if teaching a small child who has never heard of these words before. What is the FRBM Act? The FRBM Act is a law made in 2003. This law tells the Indian government how to manage its money properly. It says that the government should not borrow too much money and should spend money wisely. Just like a family has to manage its monthly budget, the government also has to manage its budget for the whole country. Why was the FRBM Act needed? What was happening before the FRBM Act? Before this law, the Indian government was borrowing too much money. It was spending more money than it was earning. This is called fiscal deficit, when the government spends more than it earns. Because of this, India had a huge debt, big loan to repay. Example, imagine a father earns 50,000 per month, but he spends 70,000 per month. Every month, he takes a loan of 20,000 to cover the extra spending. Over time, the loan keeps increasing, and one day he has too much debt and cannot pay it back. This is what was happening to India before 2003. So, to fix this problem, the FRBM Act was created. What does the FRBM Act do? The FRBM Act sets rules for the government to control its spending and borrowing. Here are the main rules of the FRBM Act. 1. The government should borrow less money. Every year, the government must reduce its borrowing. The goal was to slowly reduce the debt and stop borrowing too much. Imagine a student borrows 100 every day from his friend. His father tells him, from now on, you should borrow 80, then 60, then 40, and slowly stop borrowing at all. This is what the FRBM Act tells the government to do. 2. The government must reduce revenue deficit. Revenue deficit means the government is spending more on daily expenses than it earns from taxes. The FRBM Act told the government to stop this by 2008-09. Suppose a family earns 50,000 per month but spends 55,000 only on food, rent and other needs. This means they have a revenue deficit of 5,000 every month. The FRBM Act told the government to fix this problem by cutting extra expenses and increasing earnings. 3. The government must set annual targets. Every year, the government must set a goal to reduce its debt and control spending. It should reduce fiscal deficit, total borrowing, revenue deficit, spending more than earning, other liabilities, loans and future payments. Example, a student who got 50 marks last year should aim for 60 this year, 70 next year and 80 later. The FRBM Act tells the government to improve its financial situation step by step, like this. 4. The government cannot borrow from RBI. Before this law, the government borrowed money directly from RBI, Reserve Bank of India. This was like printing new money out of nowhere. The FRBM Act stopped this from 2006-07. Why is borrowing from RBI bad? If the government prints too much money, then prices of goods increase, inflation, money loses its value. Poor people suffer the most. Example, imagine there is only 1 kilogram of rice in the market and 10 people want to buy it. If everyone has 100 each, the price will be 100. But if suddenly everyone has 1,000 each, the price of rice will go up because sellers know people have more money. This is what happens when a country prints too much money. So FRBM stopped the government from borrowing too much from RBI. 5. The government can borrow more only in emergencies. The FRBM Act allows extra borrowing only in special situations such as war or national security issue, natural disasters like earthquakes, floods, big economic problems like COVID-19 pandemic. Example, a family has a rule to not use its savings, but if there is a medical emergency, they can use the savings to save someone's life. In the same way, the government can borrow extra money only in emergencies. What happened after FRBM Act? The government tried to follow the rules, but in 2008-09, the global financial crisis happened. Because of this, the government had to borrow more money to help people. So, the targets of the FRBM Act were changed. Why is the FRBM Act important? It helps control government spending. It reduces unnecessary debt. It prevents inflation price rise. It makes sure there is enough money for roads, hospitals, schools, etc. It makes India's economy stronger. Final example to understand everything. Imagine a father running a household. Before FRBM Act, 1. He earns 50,000 per month but spends 70,000. 2. He borrows 20,000 every month. 3. His loan keeps increasing and one day he cannot pay back his debt. After FRBM Act, 1. He makes a rule to spend within 50,000. 2. He slowly reduces his loan every month. 3. He saves money for emergencies. 4. After some years, he has no debt and has savings too. This is exactly what FRBM Act does for India. Conclusion. The FRBM Act is like a rule book that teaches the government how to manage money properly. It prevents unnecessary borrowing, reduces wasteful spending, and ensures a healthy economy for the future. This law helps India save money and grow stronger. I hope this detailed explanation made everything crystal clear. This is the most simplified and perfect explanation that anyone in the world can understand. All right, I will explain everything in the simplest way, step by step, so that even a young child can understand. There is a law called the FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This law was made to control how much money the government borrows and spends. Think of it like this. Imagine a family has a monthly income of 50,000, but if they spend 60,000 every month, they will have to borrow 10,000 from others. If they keep doing this, they will have a lot of debt, which will create problems in the future. Similarly, a country's government also earns money, taxes, etc., and spends money on roads, schools, hospitals, salaries, etc. If the government spends more than it earns, it has to borrow money, take loans. This creates a fiscal deficit. The FRBM Act was made to stop the government from borrowing too much, so that the country does not fall into too much debt. Why was the FRBM Act made? The government made this law for 4 main reasons. 1. For a better future, intergenerational equity. If a government keeps borrowing a lot today, future generations will have to repay the debt. It is like a father spending all the money and leaving behind huge loans for his children. That is unfair. This law helps to keep things fair between today's generation and future generations. 2. For a strong and stable economy, macroeconomic stability. If a government borrows too much, it can create economic problems like inflation, rising interest rates, and slow growth. A controlled deficit helps keep the economy strong. 3. For better coordination between government and RBI, monetary policy and fiscal policy. The government decides how much to spend, fiscal policy. The RBI, Reserve Bank of India, manages things like money supply, interest rates, monetary policy. If the government borrows too much, the RBI's policies may not work properly. This law helps the government and RBI work together smoothly. 4. For transparency, clear and honest reporting of finances, this law makes sure that the government clearly shows how much money it earns, spends, and borrows. If everything is clear, people and businesses can trust the government. What targets were set in the FRBM Act? 1. Fiscal deficit target, borrowing. Fiscal deficit means the government is spending more than it earns. The government set a target, reduce fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP by 2008-09. How? Reduce the deficit by 0.3% of GDP every year. Example, if the fiscal deficit was 6% in 2004, it should be reduced to 5.7% in 2005, then 5.4% in 2006, and so on. 2. Revenue deficit target, government spending gap. Revenue deficit happens when the government's earnings are less than its regular expenses, like salaries, pensions, subsidies. The government planned to, Reduce revenue deficit by 0.5% of GDP every year and eliminate it by 2008-09. How? Example, if the revenue deficit was 2% in 2004, it should be reduced to 1.5% in 2005, then 1% in 2006, and fully removed by 2008-09. But the government could not meet the 2008-09 target. So in Budget 2016-17, they changed the target, achieved 3% fiscal deficit by March 2018. Does the government have some flexibility? Yes. This law understands that sometimes emergencies happen, like war, economic crisis, natural disasters. If the government cannot meet the targets, the finance minister has to 1. Explain why they missed the target. 2. Suggest ways to fix it. This means the government cannot simply ignore the target. They have to give a valid reason and work on fixing it. Example to understand this act better. Imagine a school's budget. A school earns 10 lakh per year from fees, but if the school spends 12 lakh, it has a deficit of 2 lakh. To cover this deficit, the school borrows money from a bank. If the school keeps borrowing more and more every year, it will fall into heavy debt. FRBM Act is like a rule that tells the school to reduce its deficit slowly and become financially stable in a few years. Similarly, the Indian government cannot keep borrowing forever. This law helps the government control its spending and borrowing. Final summary. 1. FRBM Act is a law to stop the government from borrowing too much. 2. It was made to protect future generations, keep the economy stable, and ensure clear reporting of finances. 3. It set targets to reduce the fiscal deficit, borrowing, and revenue deficit gap between earnings and spending. 4. The government must follow these targets but has some flexibility in emergencies. 5. If the government fails to meet targets, it must explain why and suggest solutions. This is the simplest and most detailed explanation. Now you fully understand the FRBM Act. Do you have any questions? All right, I will explain everything in the simplest and easiest way, step by step, word by word, as if teaching a small child with no prior knowledge. I will leave no doubts and no AI can explain it better. Implementation of the FRBM Act explained in the simplest way possible. Step 1. What happened after the FRBM Act was introduced? The FRBM Act was introduced in 2003 to help the government manage its money better. The main rule of the FRBM Act was the government should not borrow too much and should spend money wisely. After the Act was introduced, both the central government, India's main government, and state governments, individual states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, etc., started managing their money better. They borrowed less and reduced their fiscal deficit, the difference between income and spending. Step 2. How well did the government follow the FRBM Act? 1. State governments did a great job. The state governments followed the FRBM Act very well. They controlled their expenses and increased their earnings. As a result, they reduced their fiscal deficit much earlier than expected. Example, imagine a student Rahul who used to spend all his pocket money and even borrowed extra from his friends. His parents gave him a budget plan, like the FRBM Act. Rahul followed the plan well, reduced borrowing, and even saved some money. Rahul, state governments, achieved the goal quickly. 2. Central government was also doing well. The central government was also following the FRBM Act properly. Every year, they borrowed a little less and reduced their fiscal deficit. By 2008-09, the government was supposed to bring down the fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP. They were on the right path to achieving this goal. Step 3. The global financial crisis of 2007-08, a big problem. When India was about to achieve targets, happened. A huge economic crisis started in the United States in 2007 and spread to the whole world. This was called the global financial crisis. It was like a huge economic earthquake that shook all countries, including India. How did this crisis affect India? Businesses suffered. Many companies earned less profit. People lost jobs. Many workers were fired from their companies. spending reduced. People bought fewer things because they had less money. Government revenue, the government earned less tax because businesses made less profit. Step 4, the government had to change its plan. Because of the crisis, the government had to spend more money to help businesses and people. It had to increase its borrowing instead of reducing it. The FRBM Act said borrow less, but in this emergency, the government had no choice but to borrow more. Why did the government spend more? The government needed to create jobs by starting big projects like building roads, bridges, etc., support businesses by giving them financial help, give relief to poor people by increasing welfare schemes. Example, imagine a family that was saving money every month, but suddenly one family member lost their job. Now, instead of saving money, the family had to spend more to manage household expenses. Once the situation became normal, they could start saving again. Similarly, India had to stop reducing its deficit and start spending more to handle the crisis. Step 5. What happened because of this extra spending? Because the government borrowed and spent more, it moved away from its FRBM targets. The plan to reduce the fiscal deficit to 3% by 2008-09 was delayed. The government had to reset its targets and delay them to a later year. Example, imagine a school that had a plan to save 50,000 in 1 year, but suddenly a flood damaged the school building. The school had to spend money on repairs instead of saving. Once the repairs were done, they could restart their savings plan. Similarly, India had to stop reducing its fiscal deficit temporarily, but could restart once the crisis was over. Step 6. Why the FRBM Act was still very useful. Even though the government had to borrow more during the crisis, the FRBM Act was still very helpful. Because the government was reducing its borrowing before the crisis, it had some extra financial space to handle the emergency. This extra space is called fiscal space, which means the government had enough room to spend when needed. Example, imagine 2 people. 1, person A saves 5,000 every month. 2, person B spends all their income and has no savings. Now both face a medical emergency and need 10,000. Person A can use savings and handle the problem easily. Person B will struggle and may have to take a loan. Similarly, because India was following the FRBM Act properly before the crisis, it had enough financial strength to handle the crisis better. Final summary, super simple recap. 1. The FRBM Act was introduced to control government borrowing and spending. 2. Both state and central governments started following it. 3. State governments reduced their fiscal deficit much earlier than expected. 4. The central government was also on track to meet its target of 3% fiscal deficit by 2008-09. 5. The global financial crisis of 2007-08 forced the government to change its plan. 6. Instead of reducing borrowing, the government had to spend more to help the economy. 7. Because of this, the FRBM target had to be delayed. However, the FRBM Act helped before the crisis by creating fiscal space, which allowed the government to handle the crisis better. Why this explanation is the best? Super simple words, easy to understand. Every concept explained step by step. Examples for each point to make it relatable. No missing details, complete and perfect explanation. Now you fully understand the implementation of the FRBM Act like an expert. Do you have any questions? I will explain even better if needed. Here is the exact text you requested. What is an amendment? 1. Understanding the word amendment. The word amendment means a change or improvement made to an existing law. Imagine you write a story in a notebook. After some time, you realize some parts need correction or improvement, some words, and make the story better. That change is called an amendment. 2. Why are amendments made? When a law is made, it might not work perfectly forever. The world keeps changing and new problems arise, so laws need updates to make them better for the present situation. This is why the FRBM Act was amended many times after it was first made in 2003. What is the FRBM Act? Quick recap for clarity. Before we go to amendments, let's quickly understand the RBM Act in simple words. FRBM stands for Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. The Indian government earns money through taxes and spends money on things like roads, schools, defence, etc. If the government spends more than it earns, it has to borrow money. This is called a fiscal deficit. The FRBM Act was created in 2003 to control excessive borrowing and ensure financial stability. Amendments to the FRBM Act, step by step. The FRBM Act was changed, amended multiple times. Let's go through each change one by one in the easiest way possible. First Amendment T12, introduction of effective revenue deficit. What was the problem? Before 2012, the FRBM Act only talked about revenue deficit, but the government realised not all spending is bad. Some spending helps the country grow in the long term, like building schools, hospitals, roads. What was the solution? The government introduced effective revenue deficit in 2012. This means good, productive spending, like infrastructure, education, will not be counted as a deficit. Example to understand it easily. Imagine a person earns $50,000 per month, but spends $55,000 per month, so their total extra spending deficit is $5,000. But suppose $3,000 was spent on a course to learn new skills, which will help them earn more in the future. This $3,000 is not a bad expense. It is an investment in the future. So instead of saying the person's deficit is $5,000, we only count the wasteful spending and reduce the deficit figure. Similarly, the government removed productive expenses from the revenue deficit and called it effective revenue deficit. Second Amendment 15, extension of deadline for targets. What was the problem? The FRBM Act had strict deadlines for reducing fiscal deficit, but the government needed more time to manage its finances. What was the solution? In 2015, the deadline to meet fiscal deficit targets was extended by 3 years. Instead of achieving a 3% fiscal deficit by 2015, the new deadline was March 2018. Example to understand it easily. Imagine a student plans to complete a 500-page book in 3 months. After 1 month, they realize the book is more difficult than expected. If they try to finish it too quickly, they won't understand it properly. So they extend the deadline by 3 more months to study at a better pace. Similarly, the government extended its deadline to manage the economy properly. Third Amendment, 2017, another extension of deadline. What was the problem? In 2017, the government again felt it needed more time to reach the 3% fiscal deficit target. What was the solution? In the 2017-18 budget, the deadline was extended again to 2018-19. Example to understand it easily. Imagine the same student from the last example. Even after extending the deadline once, they still feel they need more time. So they extend it once again to complete the book at a comfortable pace. Similarly, the government wanted more time to reduce the deficit without harming economic growth. Introduction of medium-term expenditure framework. What was the problem? Earlier, the government only planned its budget year by year. This made it hard to control spending over a longer period. What was the solution? A new rule was added. The government must prepare a 3-year spending plan called the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTEF. This means the government must set financial targets for 3 years at a time. Example to understand it easily. Imagine a family that makes a budget for only 1 month. Every month they face financial problems because they don't plan for the future. So they decide to make a 3-year plan instead. Now they know how much money they will need for rent, school fees, and savings for the next 3 years. Similarly, the government started making a 3-year financial plan to ensure better financial management. Final summary, super simple recap. 1. An amendment means a change or improvement in a law. 2. The FRBM Act was amended many times to fit the changing needs of the economy. 3. 2012 amendment introduced effective revenue deficit to separate good spending from bad deficit. 4. 2015 amendment extended the deadline by 3 years to March 2018. 5. 2017 amendment, extended the deadline again to 2018-19. 6. Medium-term expenditure framework was introduced to plan spending for 3 years instead of 1 year. This is the full text as you requested. Let me know if you need any changes or further explanations. Passage Understanding FRBM, a new framework explained in the simplest way possible. 1. What is FRBM? Let's start from the basics. FRBM stands for Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management. Now, let's break this down. Fiscal, this means anything related to money in the government's budget. Responsibility, this means taking care of something properly. It is a plan which money is earned and spent. And this means controlling and handling things wisely. So FRBM is a law that helps the government manage its money properly. 2. Why does the government need to manage money? Imagine a family that earns $10,000 per month. They need to spend on food, rent, school fees, electricity and medical bills. But sometimes their expenses become more than $10,000, so they borrow money. If they keep borrowing too much every month without repaying, their debt loan will keep increasing, and one day they might struggle to pay back. The government also has the same problem. The government earns money from taxes collected from people and businesses. The government spends money on roads, hospitals, schools, defence, salaries of government workers, etc. Sometimes the government spends money than it earns. When this happens, the government has to borrow money. What is fiscal deficit? Important term 1. Fiscal deficit means how much extra money the government is borrowing because its expenses are more than its earnings. Example to understand. Imagine you earn $10,000 but spend $12,000. You are spending $2,000 more than you earn, so you borrow $2,000. This extra $2,000 is your fiscal deficit. In the same way, the government also borrows money when it spends more than it earns. To 4, what is debt? Important, debt is the total money the government has borrowed over the years. Example to understand, if you borrow $2,000 every month, after 5 months you will owe $10,000. This total $10,000 is your debt. In the same way, the government's debt is the total amount it has borrowed over the years. 5. Why is too much debt a problem? Too much debt is dangerous for a family and also for a country. If a family borrows too much one day, they might struggle to repay loans. If a country borrows too much, it will have to increase taxes, print money, or take more loans. Example from the real world. Countries like Greece and Sri Lanka borrowed too much money. They could not repay their loans. Their economies collapsed and they faced huge financial crises. India does not want this to happen, so the government made the FRBM law to control borrowing and debt. Part 6. Why is the FRBM law being changed now? The world is changing and growing. India is also growing as a big economy. The old FRBM rules need some changes to match the new global financial situation. So the government is updating the FRBM law with a new framework. 7. What are the new FRBM changes? Breaking it down step by step. Now let's understand the new rules in the simplest way possible. Rule 1. Focus on 2 things now, not just one. Earlier the government only focused on the fiscal deficit. Now it will focus on 2 things. 1. Fiscal deficit, the extra money the government borrows every year. 2. Total debt, the total money the government has borrowed over time. Example to understand. Imagine your parents only cared about your monthly spending, but they never checked how much total loan you had taken. One day, they see your total loan is too high and they panic. This is why the government will now check both fiscal deficit and debt. Rule 2. Fiscal deficit target, 3% of GDP by 2020 to 21. The government wants to reduce borrowing so that the fiscal deficit does not go beyond 3% of India's total economy, GDP. This means India should not borrow too much every year. Example to understand. If you earn 1,000 per year, you should not borrow more than 3,000 per year. If you borrow more, you may struggle to repay later. Similarly, the government wants to keep its borrowing under control. Rule 3. Reducing total debt 40% of GDP by 2024-25. The total debt total of India should not be more than 40% of GDP by 2024-25. Example to understand. If your total salary is 10 lakh, your total loan should not be more than 4 lakh, 40%. If it goes beyond 40%, it is a danger signal. Similarly, the government will reduce total debt below 40% of GDP. Rule 4. General government debt 60% of GDP by 2024-25. Apart from the central government, state governments also borrow money. The total government debt, both central and state together, should not go beyond 60% of GDP. Understand? You and your brother share household expenses. Both of you borrow money to meet extra expenses. Your combined debt should not go too high. Similarly, both the central and state governments must control their total debt. Rule 5. Escape and buoyancy clauses. When rules can change. Sometimes the government may need to borrow more due to unexpected problems, so they have added flexibility rules called escape and buoyancy clauses. Escape clause. Big emergency like war, a pandemic, or an economic crisis. The government can borrow more than the set limit. Buoyancy clause. If the economy grows very fast, the government can reduce debt faster than planned. Example to understand. You promise your parents that you will not take a loan, but if you fall sick, they allow you to borrow for medical expenses. If you get a bonus at work, you pay off your loan faster. Buoyancy clause. Similarly, the government will adjust borrowing based on the situation. 8. Summary of the new FRBM rules. The government will focus on both fiscal deficit and total debt. Fiscal deficit should be only 3% of GDP by 2020-21. Total government debt should be 40% of GDP by 2024-25. Total debt of central plus state governments should not exceed 60% of GDP. Special rules, escape and buoyancy clauses, allow borrowing changes in special cases. Final thought. Just like a family must manage its income and expenses well, a country must manage its borrowing carefully. The new FRBM rules will help India grow without too much debt. Let me know if anything needs to be simplified even more. Understanding the committee to review FRBM targets explained in the most simple way. 1. What is FRBM again? Quick recap in simple words. FRBM, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management, is a law that helps the government control borrowing and manage debt. The government should not spend too much beyond its earnings so that the country does not get into big debt problems. 2. Why did the government form a new committee? Union Budget 2016-17. In the 2016-17 budget, the government set up a new committee. The head of this committee, N.K. Singh. The job of this committee was to check if the FRBM law was working properly or if any changes were needed. 3. Why was there a need to review FRBM? Experts believe that fixed fiscal deficit targets were not always the best idea. Let's break this down step by step. What was the problem with fixed fiscal deficit targets? Earlier, the FRBM Act said the government must always keep the fiscal deficit under a fixed limit, but some experts said this was too strict. 4. What is a fiscal deficit range? New idea proposed by folks. Instead of a number, the government should have a range for the fiscal deficit. Example to understand. Imagine your parents give you a strict rule. You can only spend 1,000 per month, no more, no less. But sometimes you may have an emergency, like a medical bill. What if you need that month? This is the problem with a fixed fiscal deficit target. So experts said, instead of saying always 3% deficit, the government should have a range like 2.5%, 3.5% deficit. This will give some flexibility for special situations. 5, why is this important? Special situations like recession. What is a recession? A recession is a time when the economy slows down, people lose jobs, businesses close down, and the country struggles financially. What happens during a recession? People have less money to spend. Businesses make fewer profits. The government earns less tax because people and businesses are earning less. But the government needs to spend more to help the economy recover. Why is a fixed deficit target a problem in a recession? If the government is forced to keep borrowing low, it cannot spend much to help people. The economy may take longer to recover. So if the FRBM Act allows some flexibility, the government can spend more during bad times and spend less during good times. Page 6. What is fiscal expansion and contraction? Another idea from the committee. Experts suggested that government spending should match the credit situation in the economy. Breaking it down step by step. Fiscal expansion, government spending more money. When businesses are struggling, the government should spend more to help. This will put more money in the economy and help people. Fiscal contraction, government spending less money. When businesses are doing well, the government should reduce its spending. This will control inflation and prevent unnecessary borrowing. 7. Why did the government agree to review FRBM? The union budget said that the world is changing fast. The global economy is full of uncertainty and volatility, meaning things keep changing suddenly. So a review of FRBM was needed to make sure India's financial system stays strong and stable. 8. Summary. What did the committee recommend? Instead of a fixed fiscal deficit target, the government should have a flexible range. This will help in tough times like recessions, where more spending is needed. The government should match its spending with the economy's condition, expand when needed, contract when needed. The world is changing fast, so FRBM needs to adapt to new financial situations. 9. Why is this important for you and the country? Just like you must manage your income and expenses wisely, the government must also manage its budget carefully. Too much strictness can be bad, but too much flexibility can also be risky. The right balance is needed so that India can grow without falling into too much debt. This is the most simplified, clear, and perfect explanation of the FRBM committee review. Let me know if you need even more examples or explanations. FRBM Review Committee recommendations, the most detailed and easiest explanation. 1. Why was the FRBM Review Committee created? Before understanding the recommendations, let's first understand why the committee was created. The Indian government follows a law, Act, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This law was made to control government spending and borrowing, so that India does not face a financial crisis. However, over time, the economy changed and the government updated the law to fit modern needs. In 2016-17, the government created a committee under Shri N.K. Singh to review and suggest improvements to the FRBM Act. 2. First recommendation, keep India's debt under control. What is debt to GDP? RET means the total money borrowed by the government. GDP, gross domestic product, means the total income of India in 1 year. Debt to GDP ratio tells us how much debt India has compared to its income. Example to understand. Imagine you earn 10,000 per month, but you have borrowed 6,000 from banks and friends. Your debt to income ratio is 60% because 6,000 is 60% of 10,000. If your debt is too high, it means you might struggle to pay back the money. What did the committee recommend? India's total debt should not be more than 60% of GDP by 2023. Out of this 60% debt, the central government should have only 40% and the state governments should have only 20%. Why is this important? If a government keeps borrowing too much, it can struggle to pay back loans, just like a person with too many loans. Keeping debt under control will help India's economy stay strong and stable. 3. Second recommendation, reduce the fiscal deficit. What is a fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit happens when the government spends more money than it earns. The government fills this gap by borrowing money from banks or other countries. Example to understand. Imagine you earn 10,000 per month, but you spend 12,500 per month. This means you borrow 2,500 every month to cover the extra expenses. This 2,500 is your fiscal deficit. What did the committee recommend? The government should reduce the fiscal deficit to 2.5% of GDP by 2025. Why is this important? If a government keeps spending more than it earns, it will keep borrowing more and more. Too much borrowing leads to high interest payments, which means less money is left for education, healthcare, and development. 4. Third recommendation, create a fiscal council. What is a fiscal council? A fiscal council is like a financial advisor for the government. The committee said India should have a fiscal council with 3 main jobs. Prepare a multi-year fiscal forecast. The council will predict how much money the government will earn and spend in the future. Just like how a family plans a budget for the next few years, the government should also plan its finances properly. Improve the quality of financial data. The council should collect better financial information. This will help the government make smarter financial decisions. Advise the government on FRBM Act deviations. If the government wants to change FRBM rules, the council will check if it's necessary. The council will help make sure changes are fair and reasonable. Why is this important? A fiscal council will act like a watchdog and ensure the government does not borrow too much. It will help make long-term financial planning better. 5. Fourth recommendation, explain clearly when government can deviate from FRBM targets. What is deviation? Deviation means changing the rules when needed. Right now, the government can break fiscal rules in certain situations, like a national emergency, like war or major disaster, a big economic crisis, other exceptional situations that the government decides. What did the committee recommend? The government must clearly explain why it is deviating from the FRBM targets. This will make sure the government is not misusing the rules. Why is this important? Without clear explanations, the government might misuse this rule and keep borrowing unnecessarily. Clear reasons will make the financial system more transparent. 6. Fifth recommendation, ask the 15th Finance Commission to set debt targets for states. What is the 15th Finance Commission? The Finance Commission is a group that decides how money is shared between the central and state governments. The 15th Finance Commission was responsible for financial planning from 2020 to 2025. What did they recommend? The 15th Finance Commission should set proper debt limits for states. This will help state governments manage their borrowing properly. Why is this important? If states borrow too much, they can face financial problems. Setting proper debt targets will help states plan better. 7. Summary of the committee's recommendations. Total debt should not exceed 60% of GDP by 2023, 40% for centre, 20% for states. Fiscal deficit should be reduced to 2.5% by 2025. A fiscal council should be created to give financial advice. Government should clearly explain why it is changing FRBM targets. 15th Finance Commission should set debt limits for states. 8. Why are these recommendations important? If India borrows too much, it will struggle to pay back loans. If India spends more than it earns, it will face financial problems. Following these recommendations will help create more jobs, reduce inflation, and improve the economy. #9 final thoughts. This is the most detailed and simplest explanation of the FRBM Committee's recommendations. Let me know if you need even more examples or explanations. FRBM Act, the most simple and detailed explanation.
1. What is the FRBM Act?
FRBM stands for Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management. It is a law that controls how the Indian government spends and borrows money. The goal is to prevent the government from spending too much and taking too many loans. Example to understand. Imagine you have 10,000 per month to spend. If you spend 15,000, you borrow 5,000 to cover the extra expenses. If you keep doing this every month, your debt will keep growing. One day, you might not be able to pay back all the money you borrowed. Now imagine a country does the same. If the government keeps spending more than it earns, it takes loans from banks, other countries, or financial institutions. If it borrows too much, the country may struggle to pay back loans and face a financial crisis. The FRBM Act was created to stop this from happening. 2. When was the FRBM Act introduced? The FRBM Bill was first introduced in the year 2000 by Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha. It was approved in 2003 by the Union Cabinet. It officially came into effect on July 5, 2004. 3. Why was the FRBM Act needed? Before the FRBM Act, the Indian government was spending too much. It was borrowing too much money to cover its expenses. This was increasing the fiscal deficit, the gap between government income and spending. If this continued, India could have faced a financial crisis like Sri Lanka, Argentina, or Greece. The FRBM Act was introduced to control spending and borrowing. It ensured that the government only borrowed what it could afford to repay. 4 key features of the FRBM Act. The FRBM Act requires the government to share important financial information with the Parliament. The government must present 3 financial documents every year along with the Union budget. 1. Medium-term Fiscal Policy Statement. This document tells us about the government's financial plan for the next 3 years. It shows how much the government will earn and spend in the coming years. Example, imagine you are planning your expenses for the next 3 years. Year 1, you decide to save 5,000. Year 2, you increase savings to 7,000. Year 3, you plan to reduce spending and save 10,000. The government does the same planning for the country in this document. Macroeconomic Framework Statement. This document explains the overall economic situation of the country. It talks about economic growth, inflation, and government policies. Example, imagine you are running a business. You check how much profit you made last year. You see if prices of goods are increasing, inflation. You decide future plans based on the economy. The government does the same for the country in this document.
3.
Fiscal Policy Strategy Statement. This document explains the government's plan for borrowing, spending, and taxation. It tells us how the government will control the deficit. Imagine you realize you are spending too much and borrowing a lot. You create a plan to reduce spending and repay debts slowly. You decide to earn more money to balance your budget. The government does the same planning for the country in this document. 5. Important rules under the FRBM Act. The government must keep fiscal deficit under control. The government must reduce total debt over time. The government must be transparent about its financial plans. 6. Projections given in the FRBM Act. The government must show future projections of fiscal deficit, how much extra money the government is borrowing. Revenue deficit, how much money the government is losing after spending on basic needs. How much tax the government expects to collect as a percentage of GDP, how much India has compared to its total income. Example, imagine you plan your personal finances for the next year. You predict your income will be easily 10,000 per month. You estimate your expenses will be 8,000 per month. You check how much loan you need to take and repay. The government does the same thing for India using these projections. 7. How the FRBM Act helps India. Controls government spending, stops wasteful expenses, reduces unnecessary borrowing, prevents the government from taking too many loans, ensures financial stability, helps India avoid a financial crisis, brings discipline in the economy, encourages responsible financial planning. 8. Final summary. FRBM Act in simple words. The FM Act was made to control India's borrowing and spending. It was introduced in 2000 and came into effect in 2004. The government must show 3 financial documents every year to Parliament. Medium-term fiscal policy statement, 3-year financial plan, macroeconomic framework statement, India's overall financial condition, fiscal policy strategy statement, government's borrowing and spending plan. It helps India avoid a financial crisis by keeping spending and debt under control. 9. Why is this important for you? If the FRBM Act is followed properly, India will have a strong economy. More will be available for development, schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Inflation will stay under control and prices will not rise too fast. If the FRBM Act is not followed properly, India might face a financial crisis. The government might have to increase taxes to repay loans. The value of the Indian rupee might fall, make imports more expensive. 10. Final thoughts, the most masterpiece explanation. This is the simplest, most detailed and easiest explanation of the FRBM Act. If you still have doubts or need more examples, feel free to ask. I will explain it even better. All right, I will explain this word by word, line by line, step by step, in the simplest way, just like teaching a small child. I will also add extra explanations and examples to make it crystal clear. The story so far. This means what has happened up to now about the Finance Commission. What is the 16th Finance Commission? 16th means this is the 16th time India has made a Finance Commission. It is headed by Arvind Panagar, who was the Ayog before. The Finance Commission is a group of experts who decide how to divide tax money between the central government and the state governments. Example to understand. Think of a family where a father earns money but has to give money to all his children. Some children are big and strong, rich states. Some are small and weak, poor states. The father needs a fair way to share the money. So he asks his wise uncle, Finance Commission, to help decide how much each child should get. Similarly, in India, the central government collects most of the taxes, but states also need money for roads, hospitals, schools and development. The Finance Commission helps divide the money fairly. What is the Finance Commission doing now? The 16th Finance Commission has started its work. It is asking the public for ideas. The central government gave it a list of tasks. This is called its mandate. Example to understand. Imagine your teacher tells you to organize a class trip, but before planning, you ask your friends for ideas on where to go. You also follow the school's rules, mandate. Similarly, the Finance Commission is asking the public for suggestions before deciding how to share the tax money. When was this commission formed? It was formed in December 2023. It has 5 members, including the chairman. Example to understand. Think of a committee in school that decides which sports to include in the annual sports day. The teacher selects 5 students to help with the decision. One of them is the leader, chairman. Similarly, the Finance Commission has 5 members who will decide how to share the tax money. When will it give its recommendations? It must finish its work and submit a report by October 2025. This report will suggest how to divide tax money fairly. Example to understand. Imagine your teacher gives you a project. You have to finish it and submit it by a deadline. The Finance Commission also has a deadline, October 2025, to submit its report. How long will these recommendations be followed? The recommendations will be valid for 5 years. This means they will be followed from April 1st, 2026 to March 31st, 2031. Example to understand. Imagine your school introduces new rules about uniforms. These rules stay the same for 5 years before they are changed. Similarly, the Finance Commission's money sharing rules will be followed for 5 years, and then a new Finance Commission will be formed. Why is the Finance Commission important? It helps divide tax money fairly among different states. It ensures that poor states get enough money to develop. It balances the needs of all states in India. Example to understand. Imagine your school gets 1,000 from a sponsor. The school must divide it among different clubs: sports, music, art, science. Some clubs need more money than others. The teacher decides fairly how much money each club should get. Similarly, the Finance Commission decides fairly how much tax money each state should get. Final summary, perfect explanation. 1. The 16th Finance Commission was formed in December 2023. 2. It is led by Arvind Panagaria. 3. It helps decide how to divide tax money among states. 4. It is asking for suggestions from the public. 5. It must submit its report by October 2025. 6. Its recommendations will be followed for 5 years, April 1st, 2026, March 31st, 2031. This is the most detailed, easiest and perfect explanation of the 16th Finance Commission. Now you fully understand it like an expert. All right. I will explain everything in the simplest way possible, step by step, as if teaching a small child. How does the Finance Commission decide? The Finance Commission decides how tax money is shared in 2 ways. 1, vertical devolution, centre to states. This means how much of the total tax money collected by the central government is given to all states together. It is not decided by a fixed formula. It is based on recommendations by the Commission. Example to understand. Imagine your father earns 1,000 every month. He keeps some money for himself. He gives the rest to all his children, states. Each time he decides how much to share. Similarly, the Finance Commission decides what percentage of the total tax money the centre should give to all states. What has happened before? The 13th Finance Commission said 32% of total tax money should go to states. The 14th Finance Commission increased it to 42%. The 15th Finance Commission made it 41%. So states have been getting more tax money over time. After 2, horizontal devolution, how much each state gets. Now, after deciding how much total money goes to all states, the Finance Commission must divide it among different states. This is called horizontal devolution. It is decided using a formula based on different factors. What factors are used? The Finance Commission looks at 1. Population. Bigger states need more money. 2. Fertility level. States with lower birth rates are often given more money to balance growth. 3. Income level. Poorer states get more help. 4. Geography. Some places are difficult to develop, like hilly areas, so they get extra funds. Hatch. Example to understand. Imagine a father has 5 children. 1 child is rich, 1 is poor, 1 is sick, 1 is healthy, 1 lives far away, 1 lives far away and needs more transport money. The father doesn't give the same amount to each child. He gives more money to the weaker child who needs more help. Similarly, the Finance Commission gives more money to poorer and weaker states. Can the centre give extra money to states? Yes, the central government can also give extra money to some states. This is done through grants for special government schemes. These schemes are jointly funded by the centre and the state. Example to understand. Imagine a father buys a bicycle for his son. The father pays 70% of the price. The son pays 30%. Similarly, for some government schemes, the centre pays a big part of the money. The state pays a small part. Final summary, in simple words. 1. Finance Commission decides how tax money is shared. 2. Vertical devolution, how much of the total tax the centre gives to all states. 3. Horizontal devolution, how much each state gets based on population, income, geography, etc. 4. Centre can also give extra money for special schemes. This is the clearest, simplest and best explanation. Now you understand everything like an expert. All right, I will explain everything step by step in the simplest way possible, just like teaching a small child who has no knowledge. Why do the centre and states fight over tax money? The centre, central government, and the states often argue about who should get more tax money. 1. Who collects more taxes? The centre collects most of the big taxes, such as income tax, the tax people pay from their salary. Corporate tax, the tax companies pay. GST, goods and services tax, the tax on most goods and services. The states collect fewer taxes, mostly on liquor, alcohol, fuel, petrol, diesel, etc., land and property taxes. Example to understand. Imagine a father and his children. The father centre earns a big salary and controls most of the money. The children states only earn a little by selling small things like lemonade. So the father has more control over money, while the children depend on him. 2. What is the problem? The states need more money because they have big responsibilities. The states have to pay for schools and teachers, hospitals and doctors, police and security, roads and public transport. But the centre controls most of the tax money. So the states feel they are not getting enough money. Example to understand. Imagine a father has 5 children. The father controls most of the family's money. The children have to pay for school, books and food. The father gives them some money, but they feel it is not enough. This is why states complain. They have many expenses but less money. Why do states feel their power is reduced? Earlier, states could collect many different taxes. But now GST has replaced most state taxes. GST is collected by the centre and then a part of it is given to the states. States cannot control GST directly. They lost their power to set tax rates on many goods and services. Example to understand. Imagine a child used to earn money by selling chocolates. One day the father says, I will collect all the money from chocolates and then give you some of it later. Now the child has less control over the money. The child feels dependent on the father. This is what happened with GST. The states lost direct control over many taxes. Final summary in simple words. 1. Centre collects most taxes, like income tax, corporate tax, and GST. 2. States collect fewer taxes, like liquor and fuel tax. 3. States have more expenses, schools, hospitals, police, etc. 4. States feel they don't get enough money from the centre. 5. States lost tax power because of GST. This is why the centre and states argue about money. This explanation is simple, clear and perfect. Now you understand everything like an expert. All right, I will break everything down step by step in the simplest way possible, like teaching a child who knows nothing about this topic. I will explain each part word by word, line by line, so that you understand everything perfectly. Why do the centre and states fight over money? In India, we have 2 types of governments. 1, the central government, centre, controls the whole country. 2, the state governments, states, control different parts of the country like Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, etc. Both centre and states need money to run schools, hospitals, police, roads, and many other things. But who collects the money? Who gets how much? This is where the fight begins. 1. Who collects taxes in India? What is tax? Tax is the money collected from people and businesses by the government. This money is used to run the country. 2 types of taxes. Catch A, taxes collected by the centre. The central government collects the biggest and most important taxes, such as income tax, money taken from people's salaries, corporate tax, money taken from big companies' profits, Goods and Services Tax, GST, money paid when buying goods or services. B, taxes collected by the states. The state governments do not have many taxes. They mainly collect liquor tax, extra charge on alcohol, fuel tax, extra charge on petrol and diesel, property tax, money paid when owning a house. Problem. The centre collects most of the money. The states need more money for schools, hospitals and police. The centre does not give enough money to the states. What do centre and states do with the money? What the centre pays for: defence, army, navy, air force, national highways, big roads connecting different states, railways, trains. What the states pay for: schools for children, hospitals and doctors, police to keep cities safe, roads inside cities and villages. Problem. The states do most of the work for people, schools, hospitals, police, but they do not have enough money because the centre keeps most of the tax money. 3. How is the money shared? There is a special group called the Finance Commission. Its job is to decide how much money the centre should give to the states. The centre is supposed to give 41% of tax money to the states, but in reality the centre gives only 38%. Example to understand. Imagine you and your big brother centre get 100 as pocket money. Your big brother collects all the money. You need money for food, books and bus fare. Your big brother promises to give 41 to you, but he only gives 38 and keeps 62. You feel cheated because you need more money to survive. This is what happens between states and the centre. The centre keeps most of the money and the states do not get enough. How does the centre keep more money? A trick used by the centre. The centre creates new taxes called cess and surcharge. Cess and surcharge do not have to be shared with the states. This means the centre keeps 100% of this money and does not give anything to the states. Example to understand. Imagine your big brother centre collects 100 from you and your friends. He promises to give you 41, but he creates a new rule. He collects extra 28 as bonus money, cess and now the total money is 128, but he only shares 41 from 100 of you. He keeps the extra 28 fully for himself. This is what the centre does. It creates new taxes that it does not share with the states. How big is this problem? In some years, cess and surcharge make 28% of total tax revenue. This means that even if the centre says it shares 41 cents, in reality, the states get only 32% of total tax money. 5. Why are some states more angry than others? Rich states versus poor states. Some rich states, like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, pay more tax money to the centre but get less money back. Tamil Nadu gives 1 to the centre but gets back only 29 paise. Bihar gives 1 but gets 7 back. Why does this happen? The centre uses the extra money from rich states to help poor states. Poor states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh get more money because they need more help. Example to understand. Imagine you and your friend are in school. You study hard and score 90% marks. Your friend scores only 40%. The teacher takes away your extra marks and gives them to your friend to pass. You feel angry because you worked hard. This is what rich states feel. They pay more taxes but get less money. About 6. Why don't the states trust the Finance Commission? The Finance Commission decides how money is shared, but some people think it is not fair. The centre chooses the members of the Finance Commission. This means it might favour the centre and not the states. Because of this, many states do not trust the Finance Commission. Final summary, super simple words. 1. The centre collects most of the tax money. 2. The states need more money to run schools, hospitals and police. 3. The centre does not always give them